everyone, and welcome back to Coffee Break with Urbana. And I'm having my coffee break with Lisbeth Banzonen and Yiska Engelbert, both from the Center for Bold Cities. And we're going to talk about the bold and the beautiful city. But first, I'd like to give a proper introduction for my two guests here. With Professor Lisbeth Banzonen here is the academic director of the Center for Bold Cities. She is also a professor of sociology and popular culture, and my dean at the Erasmus Graduate School of Social Sciences and Humanities at the Erasmus University, where we are right now. Her current research work is focused on data in cities. And Dr. Yiske Engelbert is the Strategic Director of the Center for Bold Cities and Associate Professor in the Department of Media and Communication and Erasmus Research Center for Media, Communication, and Culture. Yiske's research focuses on the discursive construction of public issues under neoliberalism and the political economy of smart cities. So welcome to Coffee Break with Urbana. Oh, maybe we should show our mug. Yeah, we have our Bold Cities mug right now. We're using it. So I guess I think what we want to first know is that we talk about a lot of the concept of the smart cities and how this concept brings with it the idea of working smartly and efficiently as a part of public good or public service. But I guess the question is, how do we define what a bold city is? Is it the same as a smart city? Is it, and how do we make it a bold and smart and beautiful city?
Everything at the same time.
Yeah. Well, what is a bold city, and what is its relation to a smart city?
Well, I think it's good to realize that when we came up with the name Bold Cities about 6 years ago, we thought we needed something else than smart cities, because everybody was talking about smart cities, and there was a rapid rise in centers for smart cities and research groups. And we thought, if we are going to do something different, we have to sound differently as well. And so that was one thing. The other thing is that we were not that much interested in all the smart technologies to make traffic patterns more efficient or to control CO2 emissions. We were much more interested in how data changes the nature of the city and also the nature of the interactions of people in the city. And that's why we came up with the term bold cities, big, open and linked data cities, which had the advantage, of course, that it was a different name as well than smart. And also it has an association of with boldness, of course. It has a double meaning in English. And we like to think of ourselves as slightly different, a bit brave, and asking the critical questions about new technologies and data in the city, rather than looking at how data and digital technologies can be used as instruments. So that is what makes us different, and that is what hopefully the word bold expresses. It's a term that belongs to us, basically. It's not a term that you find in many other discourses or publications about the city. It's also good, if I can say just one thing more, it's also good to realize that there's a long history of connecting the cities with a series of different objectives, like the green city, the garden city, the creative city. We have had so many different types of cities, and it's an interesting fact in itself that cities need these objectives in a way, at least that people think that the cities need these objectives. And that apparently, because we don't do that with nations, right? We don't have a similar discourse about nations, the smart nation, or the green nation, or the intelligent nation. That's not something that we do. But we do that with cities, and that in itself says something about the nature of the city. So it's in that context that we chose the word bold, and what then the bold and the beautiful city is something that's hard to define. in a general way, but it depends very much on the particular city that we're talking about.
Yeah, if I may add to what Lisbeth is saying, it's indeed this. I think also by being bold, right, by asking the question, what does it mean that we indeed can talk about a city as being more or less smart?
Yeah.
It means many things, right? First of all, that we make these kinds of claims always in relation to other cities, but also at the expense of other cities, right? It's always who is the smartest of them all. So that is not just saying something about the city in itself, but also how cities are to relate to each other through a pretty competitive lens, of course. And that's also where we can situate, especially the term smart, which was actually coined and registered as a trademark by IBM, the technology company, in 2011. So it's also not just a term or a practice that comes up naturally. There is a whole industry behind giving particular adjectives which are also embodying particular policy concerns, not just of the cities themselves, but also highlight the kinds of products and services that partners or companies in the private technology sector in this case can offer.
Yeah, and smart in that sense is interesting because it's counterpoint stupid. Of course, nobody wants to be a stupid city. So therefore, if you say, well, we have smart city technologies like IBM did in 2011, and if you use it, you'll become a smarter city. Then that's very tempting for a city, right? That's because the suggestion is that if you don't use it, you're a stupid city.
Yeah.
So that's what Jesper is pointing to. There's a marketing element in the word smart as well, which works very well. If you see how many cities nowadays want to call themselves smart and are all very eager participating in this race for awards and prizes. And I think Rotterdam in the past 2 months of 2021 now, I think they acquired 3 or 4 more awards of being the smartest this or the smartest that, and that all goes together with quite a lot of publicity. And it's part of a huge branding exercise almost.
And a branding exercise, and at the same time also, even though we are talking about cities, right, as Lisbeth rightly says, we don't talk about nations so much in terms of smart, with the exception of Singapore. That's what we learn to our students.
But then that's a city-state.
That's a city-state. But even though the focus seems to be on cities, in effect, what we also see is that these are sort of national policies with regards to competitiveness, innovation through industries, innovations through investing in particular sectors rather than others. So that is very interesting. The work that the term does, the work that cities do, and how that relates to a broader tendency to look at nations in terms of either in competition with each other, or, for example, in the context of the European Union, where the idea is as long as we group innovation and intelligence, we can withstand the outside world. And the term smart, it's precise, right? Who doesn't want to be smart? We live in culturally speaking, smartness is something that is always appreciated. But it indeed also plays with these terms of innovation, high tech, right?
I think what I like about this discussion and what I'm gathering is that also with the center of bold cities, the idea of the sharedness is there, and sometimes when you read up on smart city, the idea of sharedness is not very present, and that is what makes the Center for Bold Cities very unique. Was that a deliberate attempt?
Well, yes and no. Let's say the quintessential story about smart city is something like this, and you'll find it everywhere, right? In 2050, 75% or 90% or whatever figure people use will live in cities. And that will cause many problems, and therefore we need technology to solve these problems. And then we have data and digital technologies, and take them together, and you have the perfect instrument to solve all these urban challenges. Right? It's also the kind of discourse that is in the Social Development Goal 11 of the United Nations, which is almost a quintessential story in that respect. And what happens there is that two things are forgotten, in fact. One is that technology is never neutral. It's a choice to solve your problems with particular kinds of technology. So there's always values that are embedded in technology. But secondly, the city is not only a cluster of infrastructural problems. The city also has a feeling, it has a culture, it is a way of living, and that's already the case from when cities started in Western Europe, at least in the late 12th century. And there were sort of three places against the rules of the then state, which were the kings, of course, or the emperors, or whatever they were. And so that identity of what it means to be a city is something that is never part of these smart discourses, and that is something that we wanted to articulate with our research about these technologies and data. And so we were thinking about what is then that makes a city typical as well, and that's that people together define what that city is. So there is a sense of sharedness, of shared identity, which is even stronger than national identity, right? So what makes cities so strong as well is that all the people that live there, here in Rotterdam, there are 180 different nationalities, I think, or 190, but quite a lot. And they don't identify as Dutch, they identify as Rotterdammer and Cape Verdean, and Moroccan. Right? So that combination of an urban identity with national identity is entirely possible. And we wanted something to express that sense of sharedness. And then from the word shared, we started looking for the right words with the S and the H and the A and the R and the E and the D. And so it became sustainable, harmonious, effective, because the city is an effective place. It's not simply a technological place. Relevant, empowering, and diverse. That was quite brilliant, if I may say so.
I think it's so. This is Lisbeth, right? Always brilliantly capturing the essence of something, right? But and also capturing what needs to be said. And indeed, these so-called smart city discourses, they are not interested in the city as a place of disruption or feelings of or love or relationships or serendipity, right? I mean, this is what makes urban life so wonderful. So it's this idea that there can be a top-down view on how the city can indeed be viewed and governed as a system. And I think in that sense it's super bold to precisely also play with the word sharing, right? Because if anything, the smart city is about sharing not your ideas and your vision about who's the city is or what kind of city we can have, but whether we want to share our data, right? That's what it sort of boils down to. So to sort of to reclaim some of these concepts and also relay and relate them to other questions about democracy, about participation, about rights to the city, about diversity.
It's interesting because the next question that I'd like to ask is about the interface between data and digitalization and government, especially in big cities. But how do you see that interface between the government and data and digitalization?
But you see very rapid developments there, right? So only 3 or 4 years ago, all these cities wanted to have their own dashboards, which you could possibly call an interface between the data, the city, and the government. Nowadays, every city wants to have their digital twins, which are 3D representations, at least mostly the 3D representations of the city, which are filled with data. And you can have them in a virtual form, so that you can see it on your screen when you click on a building and you get the data from that building. But a couple of weeks ago I saw a physical form as well, so there was a model on a table, and at the bottom of each little building there was a connector to the table, which then got the data from, let's say, the table where the data came from. So there was a combination of a virtual and a physical model. There are also game-like environments, so it's like you're playing a game in a city, which is also a digital twin, but the word itself suggests a replica almost, because it's always it's a twin, and it's a what's this called in English? A one-act twin or a double-act twin? I don't know. The word in Dutch translates a little bit different, but it's a twin that looks exactly like its physical counterpart. So the suggestion is that the representation is the same as the original, and that's in that sense I find these developments around the interface both very interesting, but also very, very worrying, because what you get is the struggle about representation. About this, you know quite a lot more than I do. But you get that representation through data, and because the data, they seem to be very objective and true, and much more objective than pictures or drama or stories or documentaries or what have you. But in fact, there's a similar process going on of representing the city in a certain way, and there we're selecting certain things and not others. And that's what I find interesting at the moment, but also very worrying. Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I think the very way in which you pose the question, right, about the sort of the interface is already suggesting, and it's a very good question, but it's suggesting this sort of technocratic approach to the relationship between data, citizens, and the government, to suggest indeed that what needs to be optimized is the technocracy, right? To ensure that we can act quicker, that data is even more alive than real time, that we can monitor and be
that we can predict.
That even so the more predictive analytics. So this obsession by that to get it right, to get the representation right, is in terms of real time, real life, etc. But what strikes me is precisely what Lisbeth is saying, right? It is every type of dashboard or digital twin or even technology, right, is highlighting a particular idea of the city or of city life, and not just selecting that. It's not just saying something about it, right? So we've also thought and commented on, for example, the kind of crowd apps that are being used, that were developed during the COVID crisis.
Yeah.
Our current crisis.
A long time ago. Sorry, not.
And I think maybe this example is pretty telling of also that interface, right? So a city is confronted with a crisis, or a pandemic, and to then suggest that a solution can be found in a technology because, and that's something that we see in the discourse, the data is there. We have so much data, something must be possible. Even though, and I mean the app that some municipalities have developed are really very interesting, but let's also ask, right, the other question, how come that we so immediately think about the interface, and so immediately think about the problem in terms of something that can be solvable through technology, i.e. too many people at the same time is a problem, and that's something that data can interrogate or can make visible, rather than saying, for example, how come that it's too busy in the first place, right? Why are people not protected when they go to work? How come that the most vulnerable in society are the ones who are in the front line continuing work despite the pandemic, right? So I think that's also, again, something in our bold signature, the kind of questions that we also want to ask. And how come that technology is so, or data, right, is so quickly and relatively uncritically assumed to be the solution. And then in retrospect, we can find a problem, right? So crowds are a problem. But, for example, that's what the Corona app also showed. The gathering of some people is more problematic than the gathering of others, right? So we would like, and that's something that sociologists and urban sociologists have shown, a city like Rotterdam would like to see middle class mothers with spending and consuming powers gathering to drink their latte macchiatos. But right, that's the good kind of a crowd
with oat milk.
With oat milk, right? but not the other kinds of
Yeah.
crowds or gatherings, which are then politically seen as a nuisance, right? So that's precisely what Lisbeth is saying. These
But you
technologies.
know what so that I'm hearing you, and I've been listening to myself as well, of course. And at the same time, I would think if I would be an audience with an investment in smart technologies, I would think, well, do these women have any idea about how you could use technology positively?
Yeah.
Maybe, and that's something that I'm a bit worried about, because it's not that we don't want anything to do with technology, but we just want a sort of sensible usage of it. And what you see now very often is that there's a possibility to use technology without there being a problem, right? Sort of, or with the problem being something entirely different. And so that's a bit problematic. But it's not that we're complete Luddites, as it would. It's not the idea. Yeah.
But we would argue, for example, that the Luddites need to be considered, right? What Lisa said in the shared acronym. It is also to understand and acknowledge that people have these affective relationships with technologies, right? That they may hate it, they may reject it, they may be very scared of it. They may see it as more than just a technological interface, but as an extended voice, for example, from government in terms of the toeslagen affair in the Netherlands. So we are not Luddites, but we are calling upon sort of an understanding that technologies are not neutral, and that they literally represent and embody so much more than currently sort of the top-down ideas is made visible. And that's, I think, also something that we would really would invite all, right, the audience who are very interested in smart city solutions. How are we? But to take this into account.